Another one. Dex-9 clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among the Korthak species. These humans really don't learn, do they? The massive alien stood 12 feet tall, his exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh arena lights. Forearms crossed over his barrel chest as he watched the latest acquisition being dragged through the reinforced titanium corridors. The human was unconscious, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, but even unconscious he looked troublesome. This one's different, hissed Yara Prime, her serpentine body coiling around the observation platform. Look at those scars. This isn't some civilian we plucked from a transport ship. Zollicht, a crystalline being whose body chimed with every movement, leaned forward with interest. The betting pools are already forming. I give him 30 minutes before Crusher turns him into paste. 30 minutes? Dex-9 laughed, a sound like grinding metal. You are generous, friend. I'm thinking 10, maybe 15 if he's particularly entertaining while he dies. The human stirred as the guard bots dumped him unceremoniously onto the arena floor. Sand scattered around his body, already stained with the blood of countless previous victims. The crowd above roared their approval. Thousands of aliens from dozens of species, all hungry for the same thing. Violence, death, and the satisfaction of watching another human learn their place in the galaxy. But something was wrong. The human wasn't screaming. He wasn't begging. He wasn't even looking around in terror like the others had. Instead, Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane of the Terran Defense Corps slowly pushed himself to his feet, dusted off his torn military fatigues, and smiled. Well, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustic systems, this is cozy. The crowd's roar faltered. This wasn't the reaction they expected. Kane looked up at the thousands of aliens packed into the stadium seats, then at the viewing boxes where the wealthy elite watched from behind energy shields. His smile widened, showing teeth that suddenly seemed far too predatory for comfort. You know, he continued, rolling his shoulders to work out the kinks, I was having a perfectly good day, minding my own business, protecting a refugee convoy from pirates, when your little gray friends decided to interrupt my coffee break. The arena master's voice boomed through hidden speakers. Human, you stand in the Grathok Arena, greatest gladiatorial venue in the outer spiral. You will fight for our amusement, and you will die for our pleasure. Kane tilted his head. Considering this? See, that's where we have a problem. Because I already died once today. The crowd murmured uneasily. What was this human talking about? Oh yes, Kane said, beginning to pace in a slow circle. Your little friends killed me quite thoroughly, plasma bolt right through the chest. Should have been the end of Sergeant Kane, age 32, survived by a very angry ex-wife and a goldfish named Frank. His tone was conversational, almost friendly. It made the aliens more nervous than screaming would have. But here's the thing about humans that you clearly haven't figured out yet. Kane continued, stopping to examine his fingernails. We are really, really good at coming back from the dead when we are properly motivated. A door ground open at the far end of the arena. Steam hissed out, followed by thunderous footsteps that made the ground shake. The crowd began to cheer again, anticipating the slaughter to come. Crusher emerged from the shadows like a nightmare, given form. 20 feet of bioengineered killing machine, with razor-sharp claws, acid-dripping teeth, and hide thick enough to stop artillery shells. It had killed over 300 gladiators in its career, and its roar could be heard 3 sectors away. Kane looked at the approaching monster and sighed. Really? That's your big scary beast? I've fought bigger things before breakfast on Kepler 7. The beast charged, its massive frame accelerating to impossible speeds. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the inevitable splatter of human remains across the arena floor. Kane stepped aside at the last second. The monster's claws scraped harmlessly through empty air as it thundered past, its momentum carrying it straight into the arena wall with a bone-jarring crash. The crowd gasped in surprise, but Kane just shook his head sadly. 17 years of military service, he said, walking casually toward the stunned creature, and this is what I get. A big, dumb lizard with no tactical awareness. Crusher shook its massive head and spun around, eyes blazing with fury. It lunged again, claws extended. Kane ducked under the swipe, grabbed one of the creature's arms, and used its own momentum to flip it over his shoulder. 20 tons of bioengineered death crashed into the sand with enough force to crack the arena floor. The silence was deafening. Physics, Kane explained helpfully to the shocked crowd. It's not just a good idea, it's the law. Crusher roared in rage and scrambled to its feet, but Kane was already moving. He dove between the creature's legs, grabbed a handful of sand and flung it directly into the monster's eyes. While the beast clawed frantically at its face, Kane spotted what he was looking for, a piece of broken metal from some previous battle, half buried in the sand. He snatched it up and examined it critically. Tungsten alloy, he mused. Good density, decent edge retention, not my first choice for close-quarters combat, but it will do. The crowd watched in growing horror as the human began to systematically dismantle their champion. Every charge was anticipated. Every attack turned against the creature itself. Within minutes, the supposedly invincible Crusher was bleeding from dozens of cuts, stumbling around the arena like a drunken giant. You see, Kane said, dodging another clumsy swipe, this is what happens when you base your entire combat philosophy on size and intimidation. Works great against civilians and prisoners, but against someone who actually knows what they are doing. He vaulted onto the creature's back and drove his improvised blade deep into the gap between two armor plates. Crusher's roar turned into a gurgle, then a whimper, then silence. The massive body hit the sand with a final thunderous crash. Kane stood on top of his defeated opponent and looked up at the stunned crowd. His smile was gone now, replaced by something far more dangerous. So, he called out, his voice echoing in the sudden silence, who's next? The arena master's voice crackled over the speakers, trying to regain control of the situation. Impossible. No human could defeat Crusher. You must have cheated somehow. Kane laughed, a sound with no humor in it whatsoever. Cheated? Friend? I haven't even started yet. That was just the warm-up. In the luxury boxes, Vexanine's mandibles clicked nervously. This isn't going according to plan. No kidding, Europrime hissed. How did he move like that? Humans are supposed to be slow, weak. Zolate's crystalline form chimed discordantly. Perhaps we should release all the creatures at once. Overwhelm him with numbers. But the arena master had a different idea. Release the void spawn, he commanded. Even the other arena officials looked nervous at this. Sir, the void spawn hasn't been fed in weeks. It's unstable. Perfect, the arena master snarled. Let's see this human handle something that can't be killed. Down in the arena, Kane heard the announcement and nodded approvingly. Now that's more like it. I was beginning to think you didn't take me seriously. The new gate that opened was 3 times larger than the first, and what emerged from it defied easy description. The void spawn was something that shouldn't exist in normal space-time, a writhing mass of dark energy and malevolent intelligence that fed on terror and despair. The crowd screamed and pressed back in their seats. Even behind their energy shields, they could feel the creature's psychic emanations washing over them like a tide of pure nightmare. Kane looked at the approaching horror and grinned. Now we are talking. The void spawn lashed out with tendrils of pure darkness, each one capable of tearing through reinforced steel. Kane danced between them, his movements precise and economical. Where the tendrils struck the sand, they left patches of absolute nothingness that hurt to look at. You know what the problem with eldritch horrors is? Kane called out, diving under another attack. They are all show and no substance. Lots of dramatic tentacles and reality-warping effects, but at the end of the day they still have to follow the basic rules of existence. To prove his point, he grabbed one of the creature's tendrils and used it as a rope, swinging himself up toward what might generously be called the void spawn's head. The creature shrieked, a sound that made several aliens in the crowd faint outright. Kane drove his metal shard deep into the creature's core, the part where all that dark energy was concentrated. There was a brilliant flash, a sound like reality tearing, and then silence. The void spawn collapsed in on itself, imploding into a singularity that lasted exactly 3 seconds before winking out of existence entirely. When the spots cleared from everyone's vision, Kane was standing in the center of the arena, completely unharmed. 2 down, he announced cheerfully. What else you got? The arena master was beginning to panic. Release everything. All of them at once. Suddenly, the arena was filled with roars, howls, and other less identifiable sounds as every remaining creature in the facility was turned loose simultaneously. A dozen different species of bioengineered killers, each one capable of destroying a small army, all converging on one lone human. Kane cracked his knuckles. Finally, a challenge. What followed could only be described as a master class in applied violence. Cain moved through the pack of monsters like a force of nature, turning their own weapons against them, using their size and aggression as tools in his arsenal. A razor-toothed Gark found its own claws buried in its throat. A acid-spitting Melkor discovered that its own corrosive breath could be redirected with a well-placed kick to the jaw. The crowd watched in growing terror as their champions, their symbols of alien supremacy, were systematically destroyed by a single human with nothing but improvised weapons and an apparently inexhaustible supply of tactical knowledge. "This isn't possible," Vex-9 whispered. "Humans aren't supposed to be this dangerous." "Maybe," Yara Prime said slowly, "we have been underestimating them. Or maybe," Zolit chimed ominously, "this particular human is something special." Down in the arena, Cain finished off the last creature, a six-legged nightmare called a razor wolf, by turning its own momentum against it and sending it headfirst into the arena wall. The impact left a crater 3 feet deep. Cain stood alone in the center of the arena, surrounded by the bodies of a dozen supposedly invincible killers. His clothes were torn, he was covered in various types of alien blood, and he was breathing hard. But he was very much alive, and he was still smiling. "Well," he said, addressing the stunned crowd, "that was fun, but I'm guessing the real party hasn't started yet, has it?" As if in response to his words, the arena floor began to shake. Heavy blast doors that hadn't been opened in decades started grinding apart, revealing passages that led deep into the facility's underground levels. "Ah," Cain nodded approvingly. "There we go. I was wondering when you'd bring out the real monsters. What emerged from those depths would haunt the nightmares of every alien present for the rest of their lives." These weren't just bioengineered creatures or cosmic horrors. These were the things that the arena masters kept locked away, the weapons too dangerous to use except in the most desperate circumstances. The Titan-class bioweapon, designated Alpha 7, stood 40 feet tall and had been designed by a race that no longer existed, specifically because they'd created things like Alpha 7. Its hide was composed of living metal that could adapt to any attack. Its weapons were grown rather than built, and its intelligence was vast and utterly alien. Behind it came the Swarm Queen, a creature that could spawn hundreds of warriors from its own body, each one perfectly adapted to whatever threat it faced, and behind her the thing that made even the arena masters nervous, the probability manipulator, a being that could alter the laws of chance itself to ensure its enemy's destruction. Cain looked at this triumvirate of destruction and let out a low whistle. "Okay, I admit it. That's actually impressive." The crowd held its breath. Surely, no human could face such overwhelming odds and survive. Cain reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a small, unremarkable metal cylinder. He held it up so everyone could see. "You know," he said conversationally, "when I said your little gray friends killed me earlier, I wasn't being entirely accurate. They thought they killed me, but what they actually did was trigger my emergency beacon." The cylinder began to glow with a soft blue light. "This little device has been sending out a very specific signal for the past 3 hours. A signal that says, and I quote, 'Terran Defense Corps personnel in immediate danger. Request immediate extraction and tactical support.'" The arena master's voice crackled with desperation. "Impossible. Our jamming fields would prevent any signal from getting through normal space." "Sure," Cain interrupted, "but this isn't a normal signal. This is a quantum entanglement beacon, operating on principles your species hasn't even discovered yet." High above the arena, something flickered in the artificial sky. Then something else, then dozens of somethings, shimmering into existence like deadly stars. "You see," Cain continued, as the shapes above resolved into the unmistakable silhouettes of Terran warships, "the thing about humans is that we are really, really good at holding grudges. And when someone kills one of us, we tend to take it personally." The first orbital bombardment struck the arena's outer walls with surgical precision. The energy shields that were supposed to protect the facility flickered and died as the power grid was systematically eliminated. "And when someone tries to turn our people into entertainment," Cain said, his voice carrying over the growing chaos as the alien crowd began to panic, "well, that's when we stop being polite." The 3 ultimate weapons charged toward him in perfect coordination, their combined might enough to level a city block. Cain didn't run. Instead, he stood perfectly still and counted down from 10, 9, 8, 7. The Titan-class weapons arm cannons charged with deadly energy. 6, 5, 4. The Swarm Queen began spawning her deadly offspring. 3, 2. The probability manipulator warped reality itself, ensuring that every possible outcome led to Kane's destruction. 1. The orbital strike hit with pinpoint accuracy, a beam of pure energy that turned sand to glass and metal to vapor. When the light faded, there was a perfectly circular crater, where the 3 ultimate weapons had been standing. Kane brushed a bit of dust off his shoulder. I love it when a plan comes together. The arena was in complete chaos now. Aliens were screaming, running for exits that were being systematically sealed by Terran forces. The luxury boxes were exploding in showers of sparks as precision strikes eliminated the facility's most prominent supporters. Kane looked up at the panicking crowd and his smile returned, colder than vacuum and twice as deadly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice somehow carrying over all the noise and confusion, "allow me to introduce you to a concept that humans like to call consequences." The arena master's voice cut through the chaos, desperate and pleading. "Wait. We can negotiate. We have valuable information about human military capabilities." His transmission was cut off as another orbital strike reduced the control room to its component atoms. Kane began walking toward the nearest exit, stepping over debris and around the bodies of the creatures that had been intended to kill him. Behind him, the arena that had claimed thousands of lives was finally getting a taste of its own medicine. "You know," he said to no one in particular, "I really should thank you all. It's been months since I had a proper workout." As he reached the exit, Kane paused and looked back at the destruction. The great Graphic Arena, terror of the outer spiral, was burning. The sounds of Terran assault troops could be heard getting closer as they methodically cleared the facility room by room. But Kane's work here wasn't finished. Not yet. He had spotted something during the fight, something that made his jaw clench with barely controlled rage. In one of the luxury boxes, behind reinforced glass and energy shields, he had seen cages. Small cages, sized for humans. And they weren't empty. Kane's smile disappeared entirely, replaced by an expression that would have made the void spawn think twice about attacking. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost gentle, but somehow that made it infinitely more terrifying than any roar or battle cry. "I really hope," he said quietly, "that someone's going to explain to me why you have human prisoners in those cages. Because if the explanation isn't absolutely perfect, things are going to get very unpleasant for everyone involved." The sound of his footsteps echoed through the burning arena as Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane began making his way toward the upper levels, where the real work was about to begin. Behind him, the arena floor was littered with the bodies of creatures that had been designed to be unstoppable. Above him, Terran warships maintained their positions, ready to turn the entire facility into a crater if necessary. And somewhere in the facility's depths, the aliens who had thought themselves the masters of the galaxy were beginning to learn a very important lesson about the species they had so casually dismissed. Humans, it turned out, were much more dangerous than anyone had realized, especially when you made them angry. The elevator shaft was filled with the acrid smell of burning circuitry and the distant screams of aliens who had finally realized that their entertainment had become their executioner. Kane rode the service lift upward, listening to the tactical chatter in his earpiece as Terran forces systematically dismantled the facility's defenses. "Bravo Team, sweep and clear Level 7. Charlie Team, secure the data cores. Alpha Team," the voice of Commander Sarah Mitchell crackled through the static. "Alpha Team, our wayward sergeant has gone dark again." Kane tapped his comm unit. "Not dark, Commander, just busy." "Kane! Status report. Are you injured?" "Negative. Mild case of righteous indignation, but otherwise operational." The elevator shuddered to a halt at the luxury level. "I'm following up on some intelligence regarding human prisoners." "Negative, Sergeant. Fall back to extraction point. We have teams for prisoner recovery." Kane stepped out into a corridor lined with reinforced doors, each one leading to a different viewing box. The lights flickered intermittently, and the sound of distant explosions made the walls shake. "With respect, Commander, I'm already here." He cut the connection and began checking doors systematically. Most of the luxury boxes were empty now, their wealthy occupants having fled when the first orbital strikes hit. But Kane wasn't interested in empty room. The third door he tried was locked. The fourth was barricaded from the inside. But the fifth door opened to reveal something that made Kane's blood pressure spike dangerously high. Governor Thex Prime cowered behind an overturned table, his bluish skin pale with terror. The Regalian was one of the most powerful beings in this sector, a creature who commanded fleets and controlled the fates of entire star systems. Right now he looked like he was about to wet himself. But that wasn't what caught Kane's attention. What caught Kane's attention were the three humans huddled in electrified cages at the back of the room. They were alive but barely malnourished, bearing the marks of systematic torture and wearing the tattered remains of civilian clothing. Kane's voice was very, very quiet when he spoke. "Governor." Thex Prime looked up with desperate hope. "Human, thank the void you are here. I surrender. I claim diplomatic immunity. I can provide valuable intelligence about—" "Shut up." Kane's tone made the alien's words die in his throat. "I'm going to ask you some questions. If I like your answers, you might live long enough to see a prison cell." The governor's three eyes darted between Kane and the cages. "Those prisoners? They are criminals. Pirates. We captured them in the act." Kane moved faster than the alien's eyes could follow. One moment he was standing by the door, the next his hand was wrapped around the governor's throat, lifting the heavy alien off the ground with seemingly effortless strength. "Wrong answer." Kane's grip tightened slightly. "Let me explain something to you. Those people are wearing civilian clothes. The woman has a wedding ring. The man has calluses that come from agricultural work, not piracy. The kid can't be more than 17. This X Prime struggled weakly, his feet kicking in the air. "Please, I can explain." "I'm sure you can." Kane lowered the alien back to the ground but didn't release his grip. "But first, let's get those cages open." The governor fumbled for a control device with trembling hands. The electrified barriers flickered and died, and the cage doors swung open. The three humans stumbled out, supporting each other, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Sarah Martinez," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse. "Colony ship Esperanza. They took us from the refugee processing station on Kepler 9. "Tom Bradley," the man added, helping the younger one stand. "This is my son Jake. We were just trying to get to the agricultural colonies." Kane's expression grew even darker, if that was possible. "How long have you been here?" 6 months, Sarah said. They made us watch, made us see what they did to the others, said we were being saved for something special." The sound that came from Kane's throat wasn't quite human. Governor Thex Prime whimpered and tried to back away, but Kane's grip on his throat prevented any escape. "Something special," Kane repeated. "And what exactly would that be?" "The grand tournament," the governor gasped. "Next month. The biggest event of the year. We were going to make them fight each other. For the entertainment of the masses. It drives up the betting odds when they have emotional attachments." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of combat and the steady hum of the facility's failing life support systems. When Kane spoke again, his voice was so cold it could have frozen helium. "You were going to make a father fight his son. It's just business, entertainment. We have done it hundreds of times with other species." Kane's free hand moved to his belt where he'd secured the tungsten blade he'd taken from the arena. The metal gleamed in the flickering light, still stained with the blood of the creatures he'd killed below. "Here's what's going to happen," Kane said, speaking slowly and clearly. "You are going to tell me everything about this operation. Names, locations, financial records, the whole network. Then you are going to transfer every credit in your personal accounts to a fund for the families of your victims." "And then?" Thex Prime asked, though he clearly didn't want to know the answer. Kane smiled, and the governor immediately regretted asking. "Then we are going back down to the arena floor." But the creatures are all dead." "I know." Kane's smile widened. "That's why it will be a fair fight." Before the governor could respond, Kane's comm unit crackled back to life. "All units, we have incoming hostiles. Multiple ships, unknown configuration, approaching at high speed." Commander Mitchell's voice cut through the static. "Kane, what's your status? We need to evacuate now." Kane tapped his comm. 3 human prisoners recovered. "They are in poor condition but mobile. And Commander, we are going to need a full investigation team. This goes a lot deeper than just one arena." "Copy that." Get to the extraction point. We will sort out the details later. Kane looked at the 3 freed prisoners, then at the cowering governor. Change of plans, you are coming with us. Where? Vex Prime asked fearfully. Terra. Kane said, I think the folks back home would love to hear your story, especially the part about making children fight their parents for entertainment. The governor's skin went from pale blue to pure white. Everyone in the galaxy knew about Terran justice systems. They also knew that when humans decided someone needed to face consequences for their actions, they were very, very thorough about it. Kane helped the 3 prisoners toward the door, supporting those who couldn't walk properly. Can you make it to the extraction point?
We can try, Sarah said, though her legs were shaking with exhaustion and malnutrition.
Good enough. Kane turned back to the governor and gestured with his blade. Move. They made their way through corridors filled with smoke and debris. Other alien officials and wealthy spectators lay scattered throughout the facility, victims of either the orbital bombardment or the systematic advance of Terran assault troops. None of them had expected their evening's entertainment to turn into their own funeral. As they walked, Kane's comm unit picked up fragments of transmissions from the approaching hostile fleet. Impossible. How did the humans find us so quickly? Entire 4th Fleet destroyed. They are not just rescuing prisoners. They are eliminating the whole network. Should have never taken their people, should have known they'd come for us. Kane allowed himself a small smile. The aliens were finally beginning to understand what they'd gotten themselves into. They reached the main extraction point just as the first Terran dropships began landing in the facility's central courtyard. The sight that greeted them was something that would be talked about in military academies for decades to come. The Great Grathok Arena, which had stood for over 2 centuries as a symbol of alien dominance and human submission, was a smoking ruin. The arena floor was littered with the corpses of creatures that had been considered unstoppable. The luxury boxes were either destroyed or abandoned, and in the center of it all, a single human soldier had turned the galaxy's greatest symbol of oppression into a graveyard. Commander Mitchell was waiting at the extraction point, along with a full medical team and what looked like half the Terran intelligence service. She took one look at Kane and shook her head. Sergeant, you look like hell. Thank you, ma'am, I feel worse. Kane gestured to the 3 prisoners. Sarah Martinez, Tom Bradley, Jake Bradley. They have been held here for 6 months. Medical attention is a priority. Already on it. Mitchell nodded to the medics, who immediately began attending to the freed prisoners. And our friend here. She looked at Governor Thex Prime, who was still being held at blade point by Kane. Governor Thex Prime of the Regalian Confederacy. War crimes, crimes against humanity, slavery, forced gladiatorial combat, and really bad taste in entertainment. Kane's expression grew thoughtful. Also, he has information about a larger network of these facilities. Does he now? Mitchell's smile was every bit as cold as Kane's. Well, Governor, I think you and I need to have a long conversation. Before Thax Prime could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The incoming hostile fleet had finally arrived, and they weren't coming to negotiate. Multiple contacts. Weapons hot. The voice came from the fleet coordination channel. They are not responding to surrender demands. Mitchell sighed. Some people just don't know when to quit. She turned to Kane. Sergeant, get our people to the dropships. I will handle fleet coordination. Ma'am, with respect, I'd like to stay. Negative. You have done enough damage for one day. Kane looked back at the ruined arena, then at the freed prisoners being loaded onto medical transports. Actually, ma'am, I don't think I have done nearly enough. Before Mitchell could stop him, Kane was moving again. But instead of heading for the dropships, he was running toward the facility's command center. Kane, get back here. But the sergeant was already gone, vanishing into the smoke and chaos of the burning complex. In the command center, Kane found exactly what he was looking for, the facility's main communication array. It was damaged but still functional, and more importantly, it was tied into the sector-wide emergency broadcast network. Kane sat down at the control console and began typing rapidly. Within seconds, he had hacked into the system and accessed the arena's entire database of recordings. Thousands of hours of gladiatorial combat, featuring beings from dozens of species being forced to fight and die for alien entertainment. But more than that, he found the purchasing records, the shipping manifests, the financial transactions, The entire network of slave traders, arena operators, and wealthy spectators who had made this horror possible. Kane uploaded everything to the emergency broadcast network and set it to transmit on all frequencies throughout the sector. Then he activated the arena's own communication system and began to speak. Attention, all ships and stations in the outer spiral. This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane of the Terran Defense Corps, broadcasting from the former Grathok Arena. His voice echoed through the facility and out into space, where it was picked up by thousands of ships and relay stations. For the past 6 months, this facility has been used to torture and murder sentient beings for entertainment. The attached data files contain complete records of every transaction, every participant, and every victim. On screens throughout the sector, the horrific recordings began to play. Beings fighting and dying while crowds cheered. Families torn apart for the amusement of the wealthy. Children forced to watch their parents die. The Terran Defense Corps considers this an act of war against all civilized species. Any individual or organization found to have participated in these activities will be held accountable under both Terran and galactic law. Kane paused, looking out through the command center's windows at the approaching hostile fleet. They were close now, their weapons charging for a final assault on the facility. To the fleet currently approaching this position, you have 30 seconds to surrender unconditionally. If you choose to fight, you will be destroyed. The choice is yours. The response came immediately, a barrage of plasma fire directed at the facility's main structure. The aliens had made their choice. Kane smiled and activated the facility's defensive systems. But instead of trying to shoot back at the attacking ships, he did something entirely different. He turned the arena's own gravity manipulators against the attacking fleet. The Grathok Arena had been built to create spectacular gravitational effects for the entertainment of the crowds. Artificial black holes, gravity wells, spatial distortions that could tear ships apart or crush them into microscopic points. Now those same systems reached out into space and grabbed the attacking fleet like an invisible hand. Ships that had been charging toward the facility suddenly found themselves being pulled inexorably toward each other. Their engines screamed as they tried to break free, but the gravitational forces were too strong. One by one, they were crushed together into a single brilliant fireball that lit up the entire system. Kane watched the destruction with satisfaction, then turned back to his broadcast. The Grathok Arena is now closed permanently. Any attempts to rebuild it or establish similar facilities will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. He stood up and began walking toward the exit, but paused at the doorway for one final message. To any species currently holding human prisoners for entertainment purposes, you have 24 hours to release them unharmed. After that, we will come and take them back. And we will not be as polite as we were today. Kane cut the transmission and made his way back to the extraction point, where Commander Mitchell was waiting with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. "Sergeant, you just declared war on half the outer spiral." "No, ma'am," Kane replied, climbing aboard the last dropship. "I just informed them that the war had already started. They started it when they decided our people were entertainment." As the dropship lifted off, Kane looked down at the ruins of the Grathok Arena. The facility that had claimed thousands of lives was now nothing more than a smoking crater, and the network that had supported it was being systematically dismantled by Terran forces throughout the sector. Sarah Martinez, now clean and wearing a proper medical gown, approached him as the ship headed for the fleet above. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Kane nodded. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Your job is to turn entire facilities into graveyards single-handedly." Kane smiled, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, it was a genuinely warm expression. "My job is to make sure people like you get to go home safely. Everything else is just details." Tom Bradley joined them, his arm around his son's shoulders. The boy was still weak, but his eyes were clear and focused. "What happens now?" "Now," Kane looked out the viewport at the Terran fleet, which was already moving to secure other facilities throughout the sector. "Now we make sure this never happens again." Through the ship's communication system, reports were already coming in from across the outer spiral. Arena facilities were surrendering or being destroyed. Slave traders were turning themselves in rather than face Terran justice. Wealthy aliens who had supported the networks were liquidating their assets and fleeing to the far reaches of the galaxy. The message had been received, loud and clear. Humans were no longer prey. Commander Mitchell joined them at the viewport. Intelligence estimates that we have shut down over 60% of the gladiatorial network in the past 12 hours. The rest are either surrendering voluntarily or being eliminated by our strike teams. Good, Kane said. What about prisoner recovery? Over 3,000 humans freed so far, with more being located every hour. Medical teams are working around the clock to provide treatment and counseling. Kane nodded with satisfaction. And our friend the governor? He's being very cooperative. Turns out the prospect of facing a Terran war crimes tribunal is quite motivating. Mitchell's expression grew serious. Kane, what you did today, it's going to change everything. The entire balance of power in this sector just shifted. Maybe it needed to shift, Kane replied. Maybe it was time for people to remember that humans aren't victims. We are survivors. And when you hurt our families, we don't just get mad. He looked back at the smoking ruins of the arena, visible even from this distance. We get even. Jake Bradley, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. They are going to be afraid of us now, aren't they? All of them. Kane considered this carefully before answering. Fear isn't the goal, son. Respect is. But if fear is what it takes to keep people from putting families in cages, then yes, they should be afraid. The dropship docked with the flagship, and the rescued prisoners were taken to medical facilities for proper treatment. Governor Thex Prime was escorted to a detention cell where he would await transportation to Terra for trial. Kane made his way to the bridge, where Admiral Rebecca Torres was coordinating the sector-wide operation. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. Sergeant Kane, I have been reading your mission reports. All of them. Yes, ma'am. In the past 18 hours, you have single-handedly destroyed the most heavily defended gladiatorial facility in the Outer Spiral, eliminated dozens of bioengineered weapons, triggered a sector-wide revolution, and declared war on anyone stupid enough to threaten human civilians. Kane stood at attention. That's an accurate summary, ma'am. Admiral Torres was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. Outstanding work, Sergeant. Absolutely outstanding. She turned to address the bridge crew. Ladies and gentlemen, let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks humans are easy targets. We may not be the biggest species in the galaxy or the strongest or the most technologically advanced, but we are the most dangerous thing you can possibly encounter in a dark corner of space. We are a species that refuses to give up. The bridge crew erupted in cheers, and Kane felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the adrenaline still coursing through his system. Through the flagship's massive viewports, the lights of Terran vessels could be seen throughout the system, each one representing another step toward ensuring that no human would ever again be caged for someone else's entertainment. The Grathok Arena was dead, its network destroyed, its supporters scattered to the winds, and across the galaxy, every species that had ever considered humans to be easy prey was reconsidering their position. Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane had kept his promise. He had turned the arena into a graveyard, and in doing so he had ensured that no other human would ever have to face what Sarah, Tom, and Jake had endured. It had been, by any measure, a very good day's work. And somewhere in the depths of space, in facilities that thought themselves safe and hidden, other arena operators and slave traders were looking at the reports from the Grethok system and asking themselves a very important question. Was their entertainment really worth facing the wrath of humanity? Most of them, being reasonably intelligent, decided that it was not. The few who decided otherwise would soon discover to their eternal regret that Marcus Kane was not the only human soldier who took a dim view of people who hurt innocent families. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to become a much safer place for refugees and civilians, and a much more dangerous place for anyone who preyed upon them. The age of the arena was over. The age of consequences had begun.